Well, good evening, everyone. It's not actually evening here, it's morning. I wanted to interview Mark live, but it would have been like 3 a.m. in San Francisco. So I've got up what's quite early for me, though. It's not that early. And Mark, what time is it there in Frisco?
4:46 p.m.
Wonderful. So you don't call it Frisco in San Francisco, do you? That's just not cool.
If you're a white dude, you don't get to call it San Fran or Frisco. It's the city or San Francisco.
San Francisco is a good name. Just call it what it is.
Yep.
It's easy.
Nobody local who looks like you would say anything but San Francisco. You get a free pass if you're from Hip Hop Nation.
Well, like where I'm from, Hitchin in the UK, we used to call it H-Town, but it was a market town, so it didn't really work. And I'm new to Sydney, so I don't know what we call it here, but perhaps people could comment below and let us know, like, if there's any fancy names for Sydney. Like, I don't know, what could they be, Mark? Like,
well, I think people say, like, I'm a Sydney sider, right?
Sydney ciders, yeah,
thing.
yeah, classic. I wonder if there's any others though that only the locals know. Like, we'd love for you to comment below and let us know what they are.
Yeah.
So if you've joined us,
SIDS, is it SYD?
SIDS. That's what the Americans call it when they come.
Yeah.
But the English just call it Sydney. Well, it's wonderful to have you. If you've just joined us, we are not really live. This is an interview that we pre-recorded with the wonderful Mark Scandrette. I'm in Sydney, he's in San Francisco. Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how we first met? Because I believe that a couple of years ago, we started what they call a beautiful relationship. So why don't you share about that from your perspective?
We did. Well, I feel like I met you in the parlor of your house in Hitchin. Is that right?
And tell us what a parlor is.
Is that what you call it? It was in your house.
I've never used that term.
Oh,
we
okay.
didn't have like Jeeves or anyone like that, like, you know, a butler. So we didn't have a parlor.
And we bonded over our shared love of red wine. And you showed me your whole collection, and which varietal, French varietal, you were very partial to. We drove around in a little sports car.
You found out that the wine, it was all fake, and that hadn't been storing it properly.
You opened all these cabinets and were like, "This is a really amazing bottle here. This is incredible," and then you were jetting off somewhere, and it was just going to be Alex and I think she was pregnant, so she wasn't going to be drinking any, and you were like, I've picked out a very special bottle for you, like, so wonderful.
Bellissimo.
And then I found out, and then I was in Paris the next week at the Lidl store and found out that this was like a $5 bottle of wine.
Now, that's exaggerated on both parts, but it's a wonderful story. So, and then we came and visited you, and just tell us a bit about where you live, because as much as I hate to say it, it's pretty cool where you live.
Yeah, we live in the Mission District of San Francisco. So it's the oldest, one of the older parts of San Francisco. It's a Latin American arts district that's kind of gone full gentrification with Facebook tech employees the last few years. So it's this crazy mix of people living on the sidewalk because they can't afford housing, and tech billionaires all hanging out in coffee shops and little taquerias and with some sunny weather.
Sounds perfect. The food was immense. Like, the Mexican food was some of the best I've tasted. And yeah, I was very grateful when you took us out. It's interesting in San Francisco, isn't it? Before we get there, that I was reading something the other day that it's kind of like a prediction of the future. It's kind of like a view of what the future might look like because of Silicon Valley. And even though that's shifted to a place like Tel Aviv, like, I think you've still got the people that are creating the apps and the stuff that we use for everyday life, like right there, and they're living just up the road from you. But I heard that like basically San Francisco has lost its middle class because no one can afford to live there.
Yep.
You've got some of the highest rent in the world. And
Yeah.
do you want to just speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. I think, when I'm in the northern beaches of Sydney, I have the similar conversations about, for people your age and younger, the absolute inaffordability of housing. And that, it's great. It's where we live, similar to where you all live, is housing costs have gone way up. The pace of life that drives that, that makes life feel hurried and not very sustainable. And um, and so you're either earning a lot of money or you're really struggling, and there's no in between. And the cultural and geographic environment is incredible. Like where I live is really beautiful, but it's kind of becoming soulless, and the personality's gone. And when we moved here, you could bump into a random person at a cafe and have this deep conversation for an hour. That never happens anymore because
Yeah.
um, people are working inside of corporations now, and actually the coffee shops are empty because they give you the good coffee at Square, Facebook, Twitter, and everyone who's in tech lives their life inside of a building instead of out on the street.
And we were going to come to this later, but have you got any sense of how that's shifted with COVID-19? Because I assume in one sense you've got like all these tech companies that, like you say, will gather everyone in one space, but then they can also very simply work remotely,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's in some ways, like when I talk to my neighbors, we were all doing Zoom calls and working from home already.
Yeah.
So that's not a huge shift. I think where it's impacting people, at least the middle class tech worker, is that they can't go out to a pub at night,
Yeah.
for some of that social stuff. But the Amazon packages still arrive, and your takeout still gets delivered.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. As long as Uber
yeah.
Eats and Amazon are running, it's all good.
And we live this kind of, what would you call it, augmented reality anyway. Like since COVID started, I go for a walk every day, and I can't tell if somebody's having a schizophrenic episode where they're talking to themselves, or if they have their buds in like you do and they're talking with their mom.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
so
Wow.
we're not just where we're at. Like you're walking down the street talking with somebody on the other side of the planet, and passing by homeless people.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a funny existence.
So true. I did exactly the same thing last night, but I was doing the old like phone at arm's length vibe, like as I try to FaceTime someone walking along, and it's just like if someone was filming me, it wouldn't look quite right. And if you took the phone out of my hand, it would look even funnier. So, but this is the new normal, right?
Yeah,
This is how we interact. You're kind of
yeah.
online quite a lot anyway, like
And
you alluded to.
I've had a bunch of
Sorry, you go.
yeah. I had a well, I've had a few people almost bump into me during COVID because they're doing this.
Yeah.
Like they're like breathing on me. Like I think wherever you are, you should be fully there if possible, and
Mm.
not somewhere else. Yeah, but I do quite a few things online. I run, I'm passionate about these learning labs, and I do a lot of them internationally. So I'm actually, tomorrow I finish up with a 6-week lab that I've been doing with leaders in Sydney and Adelaide and Perth, of all places.
And this is part of your like kind of international ministry. Do you want to just share a little bit about that? Like, so how it came about, what it's all about? And you've written a couple of books as well, haven't you? I can plug for you, and we'll make sure they come up on slides.
Yeah.
Um, I've not read all of them, to be honest. But yeah, it's all good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, you've watched the first 10 minutes of a video, so you got it.
Yeah, I saw you on YouTube, and like you left a couple of books in my house. They were gathering a bit of dust, so I perused them.
You know, I had to pay for those. I gave them to you, but they cost me something.
Yeah.
More than that bottle of wine that you gave me.
No, it's good stuff. It's really good stuff. Tell us about it, because
Uh,
that's why we've got you on. I
so,
think there's something different in there for us.
So we moved to San Francisco 22 years ago. We were hungry to find a way of being church that would connect with us and with our neighbors better. And as I got to know people in my neighborhood, almost every person I met was hostile to Christianity and would say, your belief system's toxic and you people are actually mean. So why would I want to come to your church? And that put me on that kind of named something for me that I wondered, is the way that I've learned to be Christian actually transforming me? Am I becoming a better person? Am I becoming more like Christ or not? And so we kind of shifted our focus to say our mission is to help people close the gap between how they want to live and how they actually live, and to actually learn to live in the life-giving ways of Jesus in ways that would be personally healing and transforming for the neighborhoods and communities in our world that we live in. So we kind of doubled down on wanting to be really committed to what I would call integrative spiritual practice. Like
Mm.
there's habits and practices that take on that might help me live more in reality, in the reality of the gospel and the kingdom of God.
We've
So
been
that changed how.
Yeah, sorry, we've been thinking a little bit about like the rule of life. So we've been looking at some of that stuff, not quite in the same way that you do it, because I think you've kind of modernized the idea. But like 2 weeks ago, we kind of presented a rule of life, which actually another church in the US did, and we thought, let's just copy that because it's quite good. And we've been encouraging people to write their own rules and inhabit these practices. But you've been doing this for a long time, haven't you? And you've got lots of learning. So just share a little bit about that. Those
Yeah,
practices.
so so we start out looking at the gospels and looking for things that Jesus gave his disciples to do as instructions, and said, why don't we do those? Why don't we try some of those things? And there's some crazy ones: sell your possessions and give to the poor, love your enemies. um, you know, a person's life doesn't consist in the abundance of their possessions. um, Forgive the people that have hurt you. And these are things that anyone who's been a Christian for just a little while would know are there. But we kind of went, when have we ever invited each other to actually forgive the people who've hurt us, let go of our resentments, um, learn to interact with money and possessions in a different way? And so we just pick one of those teachings of Jesus and say, let's do an experiment about this over the next 6 weeks to 2 months. And what we found out as we did it is we felt closer to each other when we would do things this way. We were able to experience change in our lives in ways that we hadn't before, and that this became um, a living way of life, not just a story about things we believe about things that happened 2,000 years ago. But this week, I have a story about how my life is being reshaped by the life of Christ. Um, so we ran it like a school for about 12 years. Every 6 weeks, we'd pick a new experiment, invite a group of people to do it with us, and see what happened. And I think we've made a lot of mistakes and gone down some rabbit trails, but gradually we learned kind of to hone in a technique for helping each other to practice the way of Jesus, to learn to grow and change.
And for you, it's based in this idea around the kingdom. Do you want to just speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, would love to. So I got to say first, probably like most Christians, I grew up with an understanding that the gospel of Jesus is about Jesus dying and coming back to life in order to reconcile me with God so that in the future I get to go to the good place. And when I really started diving deeper into the Gospels, I realized that's not what Jesus went around preaching. He had a gospel, and it's found in Mark 1:15, and it was about the good news was that God exists, God is present in our world and active, and that we can join in with what God is doing to renew all of creation. And so in Mark 1:15, Jesus makes 4 statements. He says, the time has come, meaning this is the time of the Creator's activity in the world. Second thing he says is the kingdom of God is at hand. The things that God longs for us, God is bringing about in the world right now. God's active in the world, and then we could be part of that. But to join in that, 2 things have to happen. And in Mark 1:15, it says, rethink your thinking, or repent, or dream up your whole life again. Don't just go with your first assumptions. Look again at what you think, what you believe, and how you live, and learn to live in a new way. And then it says, believe the good news. And believe in the language that Jesus used meant something more like embody this, respond with your whole self to this reality. So another way I like to describe it is Jesus knows what's up about how life works and how life works best. And so when he gives teaching like the Sermon on the Mount, he's not prescribing a list of rules or saying, here's what a good person does versus what a bad person does. He's saying, I'm tapped into what reality is.
Yeah.
And I can teach you how to be a human being because I know what's up. And so trust me, if you learn to live in my ways, you will experiencing the flourishing that your heart most deeply longs for. One time in Matthew 11, Jesus was looking out on a crowd of people and his heart broke. And he said, are you tired, worn out? Come to me and I'll give you rest. Learn my ways and you'll experience real life. So that's a very
Very good.
different view of the gospel that I grew up with. I was like, oh, Jesus is the one that gets me my ticket to heaven someday and helps me feel less bad about the mistakes I make.
Yeah.
His gospel was about so much more. If I was going to say it in my own language, it was like, wake up, you get to be a part of what God is doing in the world today. And it's the most amazing life you could have. So step into it.
And I think at the moment, like more than ever, you've got this kind of opportunity. In the one sense, we've come from, a bit like you alluded to, this kind of striving, filling up our time, like this kind of ambient anxiety that I believe a lot of people have, which is partly due to technology, but partly like we're making our own choice with that stuff. And so we've gone like super busy, and now COVID, even if you work from home, even if like me and you, we're often at home and Zooming people anyway, like time shifted, our focus has still shifted. Like you're not flying off around the world and giving seminars at the moment. So we have this opportunity to reset some of that stuff and to almost like refocus our lives really, and what we're about, like setting a vision for our lives. So can you tell us about one of those experiments?
I gotta say, I think it's a really incredible opportunity. And what the COVID thing is exposing is, I hope it's okay to say this. This is really what I think. The real God of the Western world is capitalist materialism. We really believe that well-being is based on what we can consume and own and experience through making purchases. And with the economies on the line, and we can't go out and spend like we have, a lot of us are losing our incomes. It's really, I think, exposing what we've set our affections on. And I think in this little, however long this gap is, or this little break, it's giving us a chance to say, what is life really about? And what's really meaningful? And how could I pursue that rather than being on this treadmill of more achievement, more success, first house in the northern beaches, bigger house, more travel, better food I can take pictures of and post on Instagram. What's really important?
So good.
You know?
And you see, we laugh at that. I laugh at that, but it's just so true. That's the reality for so many of us. And when you put it like that, it's also a bit boring.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. What were we doing?
It's great. Why don't you tell us about one of the experiments? I know you call them dojos, which probably like is super hipster now because everyone's into Japanese food, aren't they? But like, do you want to just share? Do you want to share a little bit about one of your experiments?
Yeah. So, at the risk of cultural appropriation, when I was first going down this road, I was with my mates, and I said, the way Jesus taught his disciples to live in the reality of the kingdom wasn't like a college lecture hall. It wasn't like a church service. It was more like a karate studio. He ran like a dojo, meaning he had this rabbi apprentice relationship with his disciples. They took him deadly serious when he gave them instructions. They wanted to model their lifestyle, everything about themselves after how he lived. And so it was much more like a Pilates studio than a church.
Yeah.
And if we're going to experience the kind of transformation we long for, we've got to figure out a way to have more of that rabbi apprentice dojo dynamic. And so I had to change how I was a leader. Instead of just being wise and inspirational, I started learning to be more of a coach for taking on practices. And so here's an example of an experiment. We did a group one time, we called Experiments in Truth. And each of us had to identify an area in our lives that was not working, where we felt broken and felt like it was affecting our relationships with people we love, where we just weren't coping with life very well. And then we asked each other, what's the better way Jesus invites us into? And what do we need to do to live in that? So my deal was this. There used to be this guy who would come to our house, a stranger. He would come in the door and not even knock and start ordering people in our house around. Pick that up, and why aren't those dishes in the kitchen? And what are you supposed to be doing right now? This guy would yell at my kids, and our whole family would be like, oh, who is this guy, and what right does he have to come into our house and totally wreck the vibe here? Why does he keep doing this? And my kids gave this stranger a nickname. They called him Krabby Dad. And so you get it, right? I was the stranger. And I would regularly get like this, where I would come into my house and kind of rage at my family, break my kids' spirits, be all stressed out. And sometimes I would even say, like, I'd be standing there after I grouched at my family and go, serenity now. Or I would say, God, help me to be a loving partner and parent right now. And I never experienced any kind of supernatural shift. And there's actually a good reason for it. God will not do something in you that you don't consent to. And so
Good.
I told the group, my issue is that I regularly rage at my family out of exhaustion and stress. And so we went a little deeper with that. We sort of named what our struggle was. And then we also said, what is the script and the habits that you've developed that lead up to this? My mentor, Dallas Willard, was well known for saying, your life is perfectly engineered to get the results you're getting.
Yeah.
So however you are, you've been practicing this for years and years. It's not like that old Britney Spears song, Oops, I Did It Again. Whatever you're doing, overeating, looking at pornography, mistreating your children, being dishonest with people in your life, it doesn't happen by accident. You've trained for this.
It's
You've
good.
practiced it. So if we want to make a change, we have to look at the thought patterns and the body habits that contribute to that. So I did a little reverse engineer on Krabby Dad, and I said, what's Mark Scandrette doing the 2 weeks before Krabby Dad shows up at my house? And I journaled about it, and then I shared with my group. I said, before Krabby Dad shows up, I work like 9, 10, 11 hours a day, and I do it 7 days a week. Because I'm kind of busy and stressed, I fuel on caffeine, and I have like 4, 5, 6 coffees a day. And I feed on sugary snacks. And then after I've worked so hard, I feel like I need to treat myself. And so I eat a bunch of snacks, maybe drink too much alcohol at night, and then stay up late binge watching stuff. And then in the morning, I don't have time, or I feel like I don't have time to connect with God, to pray or meditate or look at scripture. And I don't have time to exercise. So I just run off to my first meeting, go, go, go. And then this cycle develops over a couple of weeks. Okay, why is Mark Scandrette running around with his head cut off in the first place? What's the script? And the script in my head was, I'm only significant because of what I can earn or achieve. I don't feel like I have value or worth in myself. I've got to prove it somehow. And so I set up an experiment with the help of my group, and I said, how could I practice a new script and develop some different body habits that would help me live in a new way? So next question is, what is the free and light way of life that Creator desires for me? I think that it's clear from the Gospels that Jesus invites me into a life where my sense of worth isn't dependent on achievement.
Yeah.
And that God invites me into a way of life where I can be gentle, patient, and loving to my spouse and to my children and my friends. And Jesus thinks that this is possible. So that I said, what's going to help me get a new script and develop new habits? So first I had to work on the script. So I decided that as a practice, I would get up every day by 7 o'clock, and I would go for a 30-minute walk, and I would rehearse what is true about me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Or I personalized the words spoken over Jesus at his baptism. I am your child. You love me. With me, you are well pleased. So my hope was that I could rewrite like my wiring. And then the second thing I did was I said, what are the body habits that would prevent me from spiraling down into Krabby Dad? And so I said, I need to limit the number of hours I work a day to 8.5. I need to take a proper Sabbath day once a week. No meetings, no phone calls, just time, naps and family time. And I said, I need to get physical aerobic exercise 5 days a week. And I need to limit sugary snacks and caffeine, like 1 to 2 coffees a day. Cut out those sugary nibbles and bits. And every week, I committed to this for 40 days, and every week I would check in with this group I was in. Mark, did you do your walk for 30 minutes and meditate on scripture? Mark, did you follow the thing you committed to about exercise, work limits, and sugary snacks and caffeine? And
We
very dramatically.
Can I
go
jump
ahead.
in there? Yeah, before we get
Yeah.
to the like what happened.
Yeah.
This is the bit we want to think a bit about, the check-in. So like just to frame that up slightly, because I think this is, you've got loads of good stuff. You know, I was teasing a bit
Yeah.
earlier, like you've got some really profound stuff there. But for me, the check-in is just wonderful. I think it's genius.
Yeah.
And like my experience of church has been around having debate. So the church I used to lead, that me and Alex planted, the Hub, we had, one of our values was to create debate. So we wanted to have a conversation every week. So in our gathering,
Yeah.
we would have a
Yeah.
discussion. We thought we were really smart. We thought this was like a new idea. And the idea behind it was to shift away from church that just listened to like one,
Yeah.
usually white male, preach and say,
Yeah.
this is how to live your life. Go ahead and do it. Get your ticket to heaven. Happy
Yeah.
days. So we did discussion and we had these questions. And the last question we would always ask was around this idea: what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do
Yeah.
next? But here's the problem. Instead of listening to someone telling us how to live our lives, we just talked about it and we still didn't do anything. And so we
Yeah.
were still in that place where actually nothing shifted and nothing changed. So can you speak into that? Because this is where I think the check-in is great.
Yeah. What you did was a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
Like,
thanks.
instead of it just being an information download, at least people were talking, and maybe even, hopefully, even being honest and saying, here's where I struggle with the thing that Dan Drew was talking about tonight or whatever. But we found out, well, first of all, I think when you get people talking and then suggest they do something, but you don't check in, it's a recipe for discouragement and failure. Like, now I have a list of to-dos on my shoulders, like things I'm not doing that I feel even worse about than before Dan introduced this topic to us.
Yeah.
Right? And so we learned that we needed to, if we were going to introduce the idea of a practice, first of all, you have to decide you want to do it for yourself. It doesn't work to have somebody else say, hey, we're all going to do this week, but you didn't have buy-in. Then it feels like legalism. So we had to like massage each other into the point where we go, my life would be better if I took on this practice. And so I want to do it, but then the expectation that the next time we get together, we're going to talk about what we did really upped the energy for what we were doing. And so we just learned, if you want to get into practice together, the check-in is the key. And so at first people were kind of surprised. They'd show up the next time and go, we'd spend the first 25 minutes just talking about what we did in response to the last time that we got together. And some people had to say, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't follow through on what I said I was going to do. And we'd say, hey, there's no shame in that, but that's something you can learn from. Why couldn't you, or why didn't you do the thing that you said you wanted to do?
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn from that. And I would say most of us in our 20s and early 30s don't realize how much we do things based on our emotions and feelings in the moment. And when you decide to do something on purpose, you find out very quickly, oh, I don't have like the internal structure or self-discipline to actually follow through on what I said I wanted to do. And that's maybe one of the first things to learn is how much effort and intentionality is required to actually do something different in your life.
It's really good. It's really helpful.
But
So when you checked
I,
in on your one, when you checked in on Krabby Dad, and if you've just joined us, we're interviewing Mark Scandrette. He's in San Francisco. Keep the comments coming below. There's some really great stuff here around practices, around checking in, making sure that we're intentional. But you talked a little bit about being Krabby Dad. How did the check-in go? Was it awkward?
Yeah, so this is the other thing that's interesting. I'd spent years in these things we used to call accountability groups. And what we do is check in about how we messed up.
Yeah.
So if I was in the groups that I was in, I would come and my check-in was Krabby Dad showed up again, right? And so it was like, well, now that he's already showed up, there's nothing to do about it. But this was different because instead of the check-in being about how I screwed up, the check-in was about what I was committed to do to prevent Krabby Dad from showing up. So Mark, did you do 5 aerobic runs or bicycle trips this week? Did you limit yourself to the 2 cups of caffeine? Did you go to bed on time? And then I could have some success. I did those things. And this is kind of, what would you call it? It's one theory about how spiritual formation works is that spiritual training helps you to do something that you can't do by direct effort. So sometimes we think spiritual growth is sort of like about gritting your way through. Oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Oops, I did it again. And a spiritual discipline is something you take on that you can do that helps get at something that you find impossible to change. So I found Krabby Dad impossible to change directly just by sheer effort, but I could choose a new, you could call it rule of life, that would help me to do the thing I couldn't do just by gritting my way through.
So good.
I know for a lot of people, like particularly say with something like porn habits, it's really hard to grit your way through. But it's much easier to make the change if you say, what is a positive thing that I want to do? How do I want to relieve stress in a way that doesn't make me feel guilty afterwards? And make a plan for it. This is when I feel stressed or I feel tired, this is my plan for what I can do. And it kind of eliminates the struggle and temptation over that thing that feels impossible to do. But the check-in, like getting back to it, the check-in's super, super key. And it's very grace-filled, but also still very direct. Hey, we're not messing around here. And what I go back to is if you're at the Pilates studio or yoga class or at spin class, you're expected to work. Like you don't get to show up and sit in the back and take notes in your street clothes. Get your yoga pants on. Let's do this. And that's how Jesus made disciples. So we had to change the expectations for each other where we go, if you want to make a life change, it's more than just sitting through a lecture or having a chat with the 3 people next to you after the lecture. Let's commit to something and let's support each other to make the change. So
so good, Mark. So good.
At the end of the 40 days, my kids said to me, and in the months afterwards, Dad, we don't see Krabby Dad anymore. Like we don't miss him, but we just notice he's not around. And I think what my kids got from that is Dad knows he's being honest about his struggles. And we've seen our dad have a problem and actually be able to change in some way. So that's become part of the story of our family, is dad used to be this way and he's less like this now because he committed to a path of growth.
So good, so helpful. And like I've been part of I've been lucky enough to be part of churches that do live stuff out, but like almost the starting point is we're all in, like we're all involved. And the church that I'm leading at the moment, HVA, we they haven't had a pastor for the last 2 or 3 years, and so that's really helped. I think the church just being all in and everyone playing a part. But I think what this does is enable us to take stuff to the next level, and not only like play an important part in our own discipleship, but in a very gracious and non kind of judgmental way, like help others
Yeah.
in that journey. So how have you seen it work in like on a larger scale? Because I know your like experiments are just with small groups of people, but have you seen it like work with a larger group?
Yeah, I've initiated these kind of experiments with churches with 250 people before. Um, and if I do the preach, the talk, I will talk through some of the process, and we do some turn and talk. And by the end of the talk, I'll say, I'm going to take on a practice this week. I would love for any of you to take it on with me. But people have to have a chance to buy in. If I say we're all going to do this, I haven't gotten their consent.
Yeah.
So it's super key to do that. So I'm in a group this week. I'm in a group right now where last week we said we're going to pray for our enemies. So I went through Facebook and got pictures of people that I have beef with, and every morning I would get up and I would look at their picture and I would pray a blessing for each of those people. And then when we met up at the end of the week, my group asked me, Mark, did you do it? And what did you notice as a result? And I just feel way more supported to do it. I'll give you another example of this. A friend and I were talking about kind of our difficulties around technology. And for him, it was his phone. Like he said, man, I wake up and I look at my phone before I kiss my wife good morning. My kids are sitting at the table eating their cereal, and I've got my face down in my lap looking at my device. And I said, that's not my thing, but I wake up in the morning and I check my email before I kiss my spouse. I'm checking it all day long. I check it again before I go to bed. And that's not a good thing because sometimes I get a bad work email that stresses me out and I can't sleep. And so I said to my friend, we could do an experiment about this. And so we went through this process and I said, what's not working? Our relationship with our technology is making it so that we're anxious, we're not fully showing up to the people we live with and love, and we're kind of addicted to the blips and blings and dings we get from likes and from messages we get. What's the vision of life Jesus has for us? Jesus invites us into a life where we're fully present to the people that we're with, where our sense of worth isn't built on our addiction to blips and blings and dings. And so we each committed to changing our habits around our devices. I said, I'm going to only check my email once at 9 in the morning and once at 4 p.m. And he said, I'm going to put my phone down at 6:30. I'm not going to pick it up again until 8:30 in the morning so that I can be fully present to my family. And we checked in about it a week later, and both of us had experienced something really dramatically different because of it. So sorry that didn't get quite to your question. I'll get
Really
back
good.
to it now. Yeah.
It's really good.
And just say, when I do this with a larger group, there's 5 things that I think need to happen to set this up, or to make the whole cycle work. First thing is, as the initiator, I need to be honest with a struggle in my life. And if I can be honest and then invite other people to be honest, now we're talking about something really live instead of theoretical. So I always, when I get a chance, I always start my sermon by admitting something that I struggle with. And then I'll ask everyone else, can you relate to this? Is there anybody that you struggle to forgive? Do you ever find yourself having addictive relationship to your technology? Whatever it might be that I want to address. Then the next thing is I want people to lean in. So I'll get people talking a bit about that struggle, or I'll even just say, hey, write down on a piece of paper right now 2 to 3 people that you struggle to forgive for the ways that they've hurt you. And that makes it way more real for when we look at Scripture and what Scripture invites us into. So we're thinking about our real life. Next step is I want to look at what kingdom vision is. What's kingdom reality? What's the new thing that the gospel invites us into with this struggle in our life? And then the next step is, what could we do right now while we're together to wrestle with or experience this in some way? Sometimes it'll be something simple as, I want you to look at a person next to you through the shape of a heart with your hands and see them for who they really are. You are looking, let's do it, Dan. You are looking at somebody who's made in God's image, who's precious, that God calls beloved. See them for who they really are. How does it feel to look at somebody in this way? So at least we're doing something straight up. We're experiencing something, right?
Yeah.
And then the next step is to introduce a practice for the week. And I usually go with something that I've had some previous experience with, so that I'm not, that I've already practiced what I'm preaching in a way. I know that this is helpful. And then I'll say, if you want to join in this practice this week, go to the Facebook group and say, and answer these questions, or tell me what you're going to do to as your habit for the week in response to this. And then that smaller group can kind of check in as we go through the week together. Yeah. And then the next time we meet, before we introduce a new topic, I'll say, hey, how many of you did the practice for the week? And then I usually know that there's a couple of people, because we were tracking with it in the Facebook group. I'll ask 2 or 3 people to get up in front and say, I tried on the practice this week, and let me tell you what happened as a result.
That's good.
And that kind of ups people are going, wow, this is a church that we're really doing this stuff. Yeah.
And partly it's if that person can do it, like if even Dan or even Mark can do it, well, I can definitely do it. There's that kind of like helpful challenge in there. And you're like, oh, this could actually work. Like, this stuff works. Mark, that's been so helpful. Thank you so much for your time today. Just as we finish, what's the one thing you'd want us to remember from today?
I think the biggest thing is, there is a better way of life that the gospel invites us into, where life would feel freer and lighter than the lives we're currently living. So when Jesus gives instructions about a new way of life, it isn't to make us feel bad. It isn't because what he says is hard. It's because learning to practice that way will liberate us from what we're in bondage to now. And it'll free us, and it'll help us to be good news to our neighbors and to the world.
Mark, that's wonderful. I'm so grateful. Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for wearing your red glasses. You're off to a birthday party now, yeah? Oh, yeah, you buttoned up.
I buttoned up just for you. This is, for those of you who didn't know, UK Dan Drew. This is right out of his wardrobe.
just for a bit of bonus material. I mean, partly, that is the case. I used to button up, but here it's too hot, so I've switched to uniform. Right. I just wear black and white t-shirts now, which is so much easier and much more comfortable. I can actually talk now. My voice has changed and everything. it's got lower. But tell me about how you get your clothes, because you don't go to shops like some of us.
Yeah, about 15 or 20 years ago, we realized there wasn't an ethical way to buy new clothes unless you had a lot of money to spend. So I just started shopping at thrift stores, and then similar to the northern beaches, people put stuff out in San Francisco out by the curb. And I've actually mostly stopped going to the thrift store because the stuff I find on the sidewalk is better than the stuff I was finding at the resale shop.
So good. I remember dropping you over to Luton, which is was just about 20 minutes away, or picking you up or something. And we were on like a dual carriageway, like quite a fast motorway, like national speed limit road. We were just coming up to the roundabout to kind of come off it, and you were like, "Oh, we need to like turn around and go back." Like there was a shirt on the side of the road, so I pulled over on this roundabout, which I'd never do in Sydney because you'd probably get like $1,000 fine. But in England, you seem to get away with this stuff. I pulled over completely illegally. You jumped out of the car pretty much on a dual carriageway, ran across the road and picked up this shirt, and I thought, "Who is this guy?" I'd only known you about 10 minutes at that point, but I fell in love, and the rest, as they say, is history. The shirt was
But you've
rubbish
got to
though.
tell them about your. You've got to tell them about your. Do you remember that? Didn't I find you a Justin Bieber T-shirt, or was
No, I
or was
gave that
that
to
your
you.
T-shirt? No, I don't think you gave
Your
it to me. I
house.
think you left it here.
It had a note on it and everything.
Oh,
Yeah, I
well,
did own a Bieber t-shirt, which was all black. That was in my like experimental between wardrobe phase. So
yeah.
and I kind of want it back now, to be honest. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, really great to be with you.